Hey, what's up, everybody? Mark Shipper, Fifth Down College Football. We're trying a new thing. These are the Zoom casts, whatever they are. They're intended to be good conversations with interesting people. And today we're joined by a legend of American football, Randy Cross. He's here to talk football, college and pro with us and get his thoughts on the state of the game and some other stuff. So welcome, Randy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mark. I'm doing great. It's going to take a while to adjust the fact that there won't be any live football for a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, if the Pro Bowl was probably still in the week that it should be,
right,
we could probably still say there wouldn't be any live football for a while. But
that's not football anymore, is it?
Oh, it's ridiculous.
What are they doing out there?
It's sort of the state of where it's at. I mean, it's a brother-in-law business.
Right.
It used to be a little bit different, but I guess it's progress.
Yeah, that's what they'll tell you. If it remains like this, is there even a point? I mean, should it just be a skills competition and just name an all-pro team? Is there a point in playing a game like this anymore? Do people watch it?
Well, my argument has always been, the whole Pro Bowl thing has always been a popularity contest, whether it was being picked by the players or the coaches, or the front offices, or the fans, or whoever. It's a popularity contest. And it's also, fans have been basically instructed that is the number one criteria is Pro Bowls. When you're listing a resume. So, if you know how Pro Bowl works, let's say you're a guard or a corner or a safety, whatever, there's going to be 3 on your conference. So you'll have 2 starters and a backup at all those positions. Right. So there's 3 guys, and that's per conference. And that's not even counting the backups and the people that don't want to play. So the number of people at your position that actually can say they're a Pro Bowler is pretty significant between the 2. There's at least 6 if you don't have any injuries or replacements every single year. All pro, a little different. That's usually 2.
Yeah.
So, I've always talked to people through the lens from my standpoint. I don't discount Pro Bowls, but I sure as hell don't consider them any kind of end all or be all. Because it's a default thing. I was an alternate player rep for a while in the early 80s during the strikes and all that other fun stuff. So as an alternate, I got to sit in the room as we went through the Pro Bowl ballots. And if our team was any reflection, guys didn't know who played where. They didn't know who was in what conference. And you had guys voting for people that were, with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're going, nah, dude, that's not how it works. So you had to kind of cross that one out, go on to next. But it's the Pro Bowls. The Pro Bowl's dead right now. They just don't know it yet. It hasn't gotten completely up to whatever brain is running that thing.
Right. I'd agree with that. And a lot of people, I don't know about a lot of people, but some people definitely don't understand the all pro team constitutes the top players. Like you said, those are the top 2 guys at every position in the league. That's what you want on your, end of career resume. The Pro Bowl is very much a popularity contest. And, not to say there's anything wrong with popularity contests or confused voters, whatever it might be, like you're talking about, but the all pro team is that's where the top dogs are every year. I was doing a little bit of research before we chatted, and I saw your dad was an actor and he was the lead on something called the Blue Angels on TV.
Yeah, it was a TV series, Mark, about the flight team, the Blue Angels.
Yeah.
And basically, this was in the early 60s. So those guys were portrayed then not as, we think of the Blue Angels now, they're a military flight team that tours the world and flies over buildings and goes over games and does all that. Well, the show back then was basically reflective of what the kind of military was like back in, the early 60s. So they were military. So they mixed a little, and whether it was, actually realistic or true or not, but they mixed a little missions and things like that into the mix. It was fun. It ran for, I think, 3 years.
I'm trying to think, were they flying like F9 Panthers at that time? What were they flying? Do you recall?
I'm not positive. I know that outside of the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium,
Yeah.
there's a big old school Blue Angel jet.
Oh yeah, that's the F-18.
Yeah, that's the old F-18. That's the one I kind of associate with the Blue Angels, just from the
Oh
look.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the F-18, extremely cool jet. They have something called the Air and Water Show here in Chicago every year.
Yeah.
And it's either the Blue Angels or the Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds fly the F-16s, and then the Blue Angels fly the F-18s. But that show they put on in person is extremely cool. Those fighter jets, just they have to be seen to be believed. They're incredible machines.
But my dad was an actor, and I grew up with that. In fact, that's why I was born in New York. My mom and dad. My dad got out of the Marines in '46, and was initially in San Francisco.
Okay.
And joined the Merchant Marines and was touring up and down the West Coast for a while. And one stop was in LA, and he had a buddy that got him together, because my dad was kind of a tall, good looking dude.
Sure.
Got him an interview with an agent. And this agent's secretary turned out to be my mom. But, he got some roles. So they moved to New York, and I was born in New York. And when we moved back to Los Angeles, it was right about the time the TV business, people forget the TV business was based in New York.
Yeah.
It was basically a spinoff of all that live radio that was always on. And they brought a camera in, and that's sort of the evolution of how it started going. And when TV moved to LA, which is in late 58, 59, that's when my family, we moved back to Los Angeles. And I grew up, my dad was an actor all through basically school and early high school. So he was either a bad guy or an Indian, because he was kind of a dark complected, dark haired guy that had that real stoic sort of, chief thing working. So
right.
Our only question to him when he got a job was, "Do you die?"
Right.
And usually the answer was yes.
Yeah. If you were the bad guy in those days, you wore the black hat, you had to die. That was just how it went, or you got beat up. That reminds me of Quentin Tarantino's latest movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, set in 1969 out there in Southern California. And the lead character in that movie is a guy who was sort of transitioned into TV roles, and he'd become the heavy. He wore the black hat, and he was sort of learning to deal with what that meant for him in his career. And, he ends up going and doing Italian movies and stuff. But that's an interesting period in entertainment history for sure.
By the way, those were referred to as spaghetti westerns.
Spaghetti westerns, right? Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Those some of the greatest movies ever. I own a bunch of those. I love watching those. They're classics. Very strange movies, but entertaining.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Southern California. I love your high school's name, Crespi Carmelite. That's just a great sounding name. So you're coming up, you're playing football. Was UCLA on your radar? How did you end up there? Were you recruited by Pepper Rogers?
Actually, Terry Donahue.
Very nice.
A teammate. My high school coaches played with TD on the '66 Rose Bowl team against Michigan State.
Right.
My head coach was Steve Butler, and he was the other defensive tackle. People forget, or really didn't know. Terry Donahue was like a 215-pound defensive tackle.
Yeah.
Who was like a demon. And Steve Butler was my head coach. Mo Friedman was my line coach. He was the center on that team for Beeben. And Joe Hollingsworth was our offensive coordinator and quarterback coach, and he was the backup to Beeben. So when Donahue came by, and there was no coincidence to it. I mean, I was getting recruited pretty good my junior year, but he was at Kansas back then. And he sort of mentioned, hey, you John Cold and all these other names about shot putters that also played football. And then when Pepper got the job, it just was sort of a natural transition. But they sort of started on third base, Mark, at UCLA, because I was raised to root for two teams, UCLA and whoever's playing SC. So, when I got recruited by SC, they weren't real happy when I told them I really wasn't interested. I mean, it's recruiting, but I couldn't rationalize doing that. And UCLA wasn't very good when I signed my letter of intent, to put it lightly. I think they were 3-6-2 or something like that.
So what year was that? 71?
It would have been 71 season. Yeah.
Okay. 71 season. Yeah. Well, it breaks my heart to hear USC turn down like that. I mean, those guys, that must've been hard for them, really.
Oh no, they
really painful.
There were 3 All-American type offensive tackles, offensive linemen that year. And I basically played defense, and somehow I got labeled as an offensive lineman and hated it. I wanted no part of it, but it was me, and it was a guy named Terry Albritton who I beat in the state championship in the shot put. Nice. And he went to Stanford, and the other guy was also from like an Orange County school, and he ended up going to SC. But yeah, it was a fun time getting recruited. And I mean, the main schools that recruited me were UCLA, Texas, Alabama, and Notre Dame, and Nebraska. Nebraska was the place I almost went, because Nebraska they were national champs the 71 season. That was the great Oklahoma game, and Rich Glover and Johnny Rogers, and and then my freshman year at UCLA, we played Nebraska in the Coliseum, and Efren Herrera beat them with a last-minute field goal. They were coming off being the number 1 team in the country. And then the next year, we started the season at Nebraska in 73 and got the living dog beat out of us.
Yeah, Nebraska used to do that to people. Very obviously a great lineup of schools to be recruited by. You really couldn't miss with any of those as a college athlete and student. Interesting that Terry Donahue recruited you. Terry Donahue was the last sort of coach we associate with UCLA being a national power. A great coach, really interesting guy. As you know, I started my book tour last year at UCLA. Randy and I both went to school at UCLA, so that's why I was kind of making the USC joke earlier. I started there. Terry Donahue passed away last year. He lived a good life, but he was too young. Cancer got him, unfortunately. But they played at that LSU game a great tribute to Terry Donahue between the first and second quarters. And that tribute, it was Terry Donahue making a speech sort of with the background of some of the greatest hits while he was at UCLA. And it was just, the speech, it like put goosebumps on me, and was inspirational. He talked about, it sounded like his philosophy, which he said, when I started at UCLA, one of the things we had to do was forget about fear of failure, and we had to decide to compete. And once we decided to that, it was about taking care of what we could control and forgetting about what we couldn't. And it was just kind of this hair-raising speech. And I look at what a fantastic job Terry Donahue did at UCLA. And I guess what I'd want to know from you is what was Terry Donahue like on a day-to-day basis? You go to practice. Was he an inspirational guy? Was he a yeller? Was he a really smart guy? What was it like being around Terry Donahue?
He was an excellent coach. He was a guy that, I was lucky. I talked about Steve Butler and him, and Bob McKittrick, my line coach at San Francisco. He had UCLA roots. He had coached with Tommy Prothero at UCLA. And I just constantly had those kind of technique-based coaches.
Yeah.
Which really, really helped me. And TD was the guy that my freshman year, after the season, we're getting ready for spring, and he says, "You ever snap a ball before?" And I said, "You mean like center?" No. no. I said, I really don't have much interest. And he goes, no, he goes, you got to learn how to do that. And you got to learn how to long snap too. Because you never know. He goes, that'll probably make you all kinds of money in the pros. And I was like, oh, wow, I bought it. Most kids buy stuff like that.
Sure.
Didn't make me squat. I did it for 13 years in the pros, and I didn't get any extra money for it. But yeah, no, he talked me into being a center, and it was a great experience because I played center my sophomore year, and I played guard my junior year, and then my senior year, I played both guard and center because we had 2 offensive lines.
Yeah, I read about that. That's interesting. And then Dick Vermeil, of course, he was only at UCLA 2 years, but he did some great things while he was there. What was Dick Vermeil like overall to be around a guy like Dick Vermeil as a head man? Was he an engaged guy? Was he a detached guy? What was he like?
Oh, he was engaged. He was very engaged. He was engaged in your life. He was engaged in your schoolwork. He was engaged in practice. I mean, he was engaged in everything. Being around Dick was one of the great experiences from a football and a just sort of coaching standpoint that I ever was lucky enough to have. It's really too bad. And TD got that job right after Dick went to Philadelphia, which for UCLA worked out fantastic. And he sort of through his own sheer force of will and ability to recruit and focus, just turned that program into something really special. Dick did something very fast in 2 years, but what Terry did in his 20 plus was establish them, with all the bowls and the double-digit wins and all those things. They haven't been the same since he left. And you got to take. I'm not talking blame or credit or anything, but if you're the person running that athletic department and you let a Terry Donahue go, you better damn well get somebody that's going to maintain that level of excellence. And that's never happened since Terry left.
Right. Which points to, first of all, I think how special Terry Donahue was. And second of all, how difficult it is to get a truly special guy to run your program. What upsets me about that is a UCLA alum and someone who counts UCLA as part of his heritage is Terry Donahue, about 15 years, 10, 15, 20 years after he retired in 1995 as a young coach. I mean, in many ways, Terry Donahue was moving into what are often the best years for a head coach. He was into his 50s. I mean, he had 12 good years left in him. He walked away and he started giving interviews and said, you know what, I wish I would have stayed because I think I could have pushed through what the problem was. And he said, the problem was I went to the administration and, this is 95. So Florida State, Miami, Steve Spurrier's at Florida, Nebraska's a juggernaut. And he's watching college football. The arms race had really begun in college football. TV had found its groove. They were cutting big checks. Athletic departments were going all in. Alabama was trying to rebuild at this time. They were ferociously trying to do whatever they could. It took them a long time. They finally got there. But Donahue told UCLA, listen, we got a good thing here. We got everything we need, but we need to be aggressive. We need to invest in this football program. We need to do what the others are doing to keep up because there's only so much you can do selling UCLA. It's a great place, but you got to have what everybody else has. And the administration told him no. They said, well, we're good with where we are. Do the best you can with what you have. And Donahue basically frustrated and quit. So as a UCLA guy, I mean, how frustrating is that to learn that from a guy like Terry Donahue?
Yeah, really frustrating, but it wasn't terribly surprising.
Yeah.
As a guy that played at UCLA in the heart of the John Wooden years, at least the later John Wooden years.
Yeah.
I mean, we won the NCAAs 3 of the 4 years I was there in basketball.
Right.
There was nothing at UCLA that was a higher priority than basketball. Never has, never will be. It's always been number one. That and the country club sports.
Right.
Big in tennis, big in golf, big in water polo, big in swimming, big in, and hey, I'm not making fun of it. I mean, the Pac-12 has made their brand on the championships that those kind of sports bring in.
Yeah.
But football has never been a priority. The place I almost went, Nebraska, you don't ever have that confusion. Now, you have incompetence which they've dealt with on occasion there, but it's not for a lack of passion. And that passion in the front offices and the higher ups, it's just not there. It's non-existent.
Yeah, we're going to circle back to that in a little bit, because it's one of those things that it has to change, or there are going to be further issues. But to circle back to your time at UCLA. So for me, if we could look around my office, I'm looking out in front of me. I have Rose Bowl posters. I have the Rose Bowl emblem hanging on the wall. I have a bunch of college football stuff in here.
Yeah.
The Rose Bowl for me is the pinnacle American sporting event. Unless you've been to a Super Bowl, which the guy I'm speaking to has, you'll never play in a bigger football game, in my opinion. And beyond the football nature of the game, the Rose Bowl really built postseason spectacle football in this country. People who don't know that or don't believe that are either ignorant of it, or they're just not willing to admit it. When you talk about inviting people out to a neutral site, big stadium, sunny spot, gather everybody together, get two great teams, and let's have a good time. The Rose Bowl is that in the United States. I mean, 1902 was the first game, and then continued it in 1950 when they found ostrich races weren't quite as fun as a football game. So, what I want to ask you, or what are your memories? What do you have that's yours when you look back on that day you ran out onto the field in the Rose Bowl, New Year's Day, 1976, and Woody Hayes and Ohio State waiting on the other sideline?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that. Besides the fact that they had just kicked our butts earlier in the year.
Yeah.
And we'd been around them all week long. And, it was a pretty significant contrast. I mean, they were sort of the prototypical power football team. You could tell they had an amazing weightlifting program and an amazing conditioning program. They had guys like Archie Griffin and unbelievable, array of talent. Playing in the Rose Bowl was such a highlight for me, because I'd grown up always looking at the game. I mean, and listening to my dad on New Year's Day mumbling under his breath when it was a beautiful, bright, sunny day. He always said, "Yeah, damn it, all these people are going to sit there freezing in the snow. They're going to see the Rose Bowl, and they're going to go, hey, we ought to move to California."
Oh, your dad was right about that, man.
Yeah, but that game, it was everything you'd always heard about. You'd always heard about the Beef Bowl, and you'd always heard about the trips to Disneyland, and you'd always heard about just all the things around it, that and the chance to play in it. And probably the most controversial thing that happened for us was when we got into the game. We had a team meeting, and Dick Vermeil announced that we were going to practice. I think it was 17 days of practice you were allowed before the bowl game. And the first 7 were going to be double days. So we were going to do 2 practices a day for a week.
Wow.
So that went over kind of like a fart in church. And the team met in the locker room before the first practice and literally said, "No, we ain't doing double days. This is supposed to be a reward. This is supposed to be something, that we earned, not something we get penalized for. We got to do double days for a week." So we didn't come out. We didn't get dressed. And Dick came in and looked around the locker room, and we're all sitting there in our street clothes. And sort of, the captains let know what was going on. He about blew a gasket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was the most emotional and pissed off I have ever seen Dick Vermeil when that team did that. But we did what he wanted to do. Some of us didn't make it through the whole two weeks of practice because we got hurt, which I'm included. I was an early high ankle sprain guy, so it was an unbelievable experience on a great team. We had some lifelong friends on that team and some really, really good football players. And getting to pull off that upset was something.
Well, that's what I was going to move into. That, first of all, that's amazing. Obviously, a story of a near player mutiny doesn't get into the media too often. That is a really interesting element to this story. You when you get into the history of college football, those kind of things happen. I wrote a story about a Pittsburgh Rose Bowl team, defending national champion Pitt Panthers, actually mutinying and refused to go to the Rose Bowl because their university had treated them poorly when they'd gone the year before and beat Washington and won a national title. And that's a whole big story. You can check that on Fifth Down College Football. But I was reminded of that immediately. So do you recall, how did you guys work that out? How did Dick Vermeil get you to agree to 2-a-day practices when you guys were, I mean, this is the end of a season. I played football. 2-a-days were the worst.
How do we work it out? It was a brief negotiation.
Okay.
Yeah, it was basically Dick said, get your stuff on and get your asses out on the field, or you won't be playing in the Rose Bowl.
Oh, okay.
Period.
Yeah.
That, you didn't, it's not that he made the point that the game wasn't a reward. It wasn't something to look at like that. He goes, that's the attitude as to why you got your ass kicked earlier. We played them. That's why they beat us 40 something to 21 or whatever the score was in the first game.
Yeah. 41-20.
Yeah. So it was ugly. It was ugly, but it was worth it, to be honest with you. I think it made the team tighter. And anytime you kind of, without exploding the whole dynamic of the head coach and whatnot, anytime you can drive a team closer together, it's a good thing. And that's what that did. It drove the team closer together.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. My next question was going to be, how did you guys do it? So you've already answered a bunch of that. It was, you had an incident, you put a lot of practice. The head coach made it clear. The whole reward stuff, that's for other people to write stories about. We're here to we're here to win a big football game. So you guys you got handled by Ohio State in Los Angeles earlier in the year. Woody Hayes famously said, I believe we'll meet this team again in the Rose Bowl. And he was right. So when you talk about the game itself, what did you guys do? How did you beat that team? Undefeated national champion, Woody Hayes' last great team. What'd you do?
Yeah, back-to-back Heisman with Archie Griffin, and Cornelius Bennett was their quarterback, who was just the prototypical dual threat kind of guy, well before his time. We just played better. There wasn't anything secret about it. We ran for a decent chunky yards. Wendell Tyler had a big game. We had a slot receiver who played for Dick at Philadelphia and returned punts and was really good, named Wally Henry. And we took advantage of some matchups. But number one thing we did was we ran our Houston Veer offense really well. And Wendell Tyler ran his tail off. I mean, He was blazing. People forget it, and it's sad. Wendell was remembered as a pro because for being a fumbler. But tell you what, he might put the ball on the ground occasionally, but he'll also run for 150 yards. So, yeah.
I mean, it's one of the biggest upsets in Rose Bowl history. You're talking about an undefeated Ohio State team, the bicentennial Rose Bowl. So when you look back, the field's painted up with the teams and the red, white, and blue. So
don't forget Kate Smith. For those of you that don't know, Kate Smith was like the original "God Bless America." She sang, and she sang the national anthem. Sang both songs, I think, before the game. But that was wild. I mean, that was really wild. There were jets and all kinds of stuff. So you knew you weren't in Kansas. This wasn't your normal game.
Right. Just such a big Rose Bowl. So really, really cool to be a part of that. I count college football, part of the premise of my book is college football is inseparable from American history and culture. So the Rose Bowl, the bicentennial, and the Bruins pull the upset on Ohio State. Very, very cool. So when you look back, Rose Bowl or Super Bowl, did you have, first of all, just which one did you enjoy more, playing in the Rose Bowl or the 3 Super Bowls you won?
I'd say the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And mainly because, for the same reason I enjoyed the Rose Bowl, honestly, was I had a point of reference. My freshman year, we were pretty good, but we couldn't go to the Rose Bowl because SC beat us. We were like 9-2.
Yeah.
but couldn't go to a bowl game because back then, if you didn't win your conference, you didn't go to a bowl game.
Yeah.
But I always thought the Super Bowl was just something that was for other teams, especially after we'd gone like 2-14 back-to-back years. So you weren't thinking Super Bowls when you got to the early 80s after being that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that, you know what, that's always what I say. I say, unless you play in a Super Bowl, the Rose Bowl will be the biggest game you play in. So it's interesting to have you confirm that. Did you have fun playing in the NFL? You played with so many legends. You talk about Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Ronnie Lott. The list is so long. Did you have fun playing in the NFL, or was that a hard-nosed business thing?
I had a great time. I had a very, I think, kind of unconventional attitude towards playing. When I got drafted, I showed up for my initial interview the day or two after the draft. I had on a Hawaiian shirt, jeans, and flip-flops. So it was kind of my uniform of the day anyway, which didn't go over real big with Monty Clark and the Niners when I showed up like that. I also had hair down about my shoulders. And I made a comment that I think football's fantastic. I just can't see playing it for a long period of time. I'd kind of get on with my life and do something else. And that got significant coverage in the paper. And it was up on this up on a not a chalkboard, but a cork board with articles back when they used to have articles in newspapers. Right. And it was stuck up there. And I was looking at that. It was highlighted. My quotes were highlighted. And I was like, Jesus. And all of a sudden there's this voice behind me. I hear this: you better get out there. Your career is going to be a lot shorter than you think. And I turn around and it's Monty Clark, who was a big, imposing, 6'5", 6'6" guy.
Right.
But I never took it as everything. So maybe that's why I kind of lasted as long as I did. I just, I didn't lift weights until my second year in the pros. I didn't lift weights in high school. I didn't lift weights in college. And so after my rookie year with the Niners, I decided I better start lifting weights because I noticed that playing against adults was a little bit different than playing against college age guys.
Right.
But yeah, it was a very negative experience early on for me, which created kind of an insular kind of an attitude for me. You picked your friends. You try to pick your friends that were going to be around, because so many guys weren't around very long. My second year, we went 5-9. Bill Walsh came to the Niners in my, 6, 7, 8. I was going into my fourth year in 1979 when Walsh got there. He was my fifth head coach, because we'd fired the first one, we'd fired the second one, we fired the third one at the midpoint of the 78 season. And then we fired the interim coach as soon as the season was over, when they hired Bill. And then we promptly went 2-14. And then we went 6-10 with one of the most hellacious losing streaks ever. I want to say 8 straight games in the middle of the year. Oh, we were really good at the beginning. We were really good at the end. And in the middle, we just found a way to lose a lot. And, so it wasn't until 81 when we kind of got successful that the NFL, that playing football became fun again.
Yeah.
When you do it and you actually win and there's something to it. And we kind of fed off. People didn't like us. We kind of came out of nowhere and we did things in a very unconventional manner.
Yeah.
We blocked different. We ran our offense different. And they just flat out didn't like us, which was kind of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, unconventional. The NFL is not the place for unconventional for the most part. They want it done how it's always been done. But
it wasn't then. Now, there's almost no box because everybody's out of it.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. Good point. Yeah. Good point. Um, yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about how bad you were in San Francisco early on, a writer I really enjoy is a guy named Hunter Thompson, who wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Fear and Loathing
Oh,
on the
yeah.
Campaign Trail.
Yeah.
Interesting journalist, but he lived in
I
San
met
Francisco.
I met Hunter. We had a couple of common friends.
Oh, did you really? That's
That
great.
was that was a weird dude.
Oh, was he, tell me about that in a minute. I just want to say this and then tell me
Yeah.
about, because I'd love to.
Okay.
I'd love to. He's one of these guys who was always like, what was it like to be in a room with that guy? So he lived in San Francisco in the late 60s, early 70s, and he was a serious NFL fan. And he had season tickets at Kezar Stadium, and he'd go and watch the Niners. And they had a few okay teams when like John Brody was quarterback, and they had some, they had some pretty good teams. I know they beat the Packers one year when they won the Super Bowl, but mostly they were really bad. And he used to say he used to bring a
Okay.
cooler of beer into Kezar Stadium and just drink and watch the Niners lose. So I was thinking about you, San Francisco, before they became kind of the Super Bowl standard, they had some bad teams. But circle back to Hunter Thompson. What was it like being around him?
It was the first time I met him was at a real good friend's house, a guy by the name of Joe Betts, who's just pure gold. The guy is such a fantastic guy, and he owned a restaurant called Hoffman's Grill.
Okay.
And then he bought a place called the House of Prime Rib. And I used to do my show there. And so he was having a fight party. And I can't remember what the fight was. It was, this is back in about 80, probably 83, 84, 85, right in there. Big fight. I mean, one of the real Sugar Ray and Duran, and that era. And we're going to go to this fight. So we're at his house, and he's got this big screen downstairs, and he goes, I got a few friends coming over. So if you hear a doorbell and you're upstairs, answer the door and they'll just come in. So the doorbell rings, I'm upstairs, I'm getting a beer. And the first people I meet, there's these two little bald-headed guys with a little bit taller girlfriends with them. And hey, I'm Artie, I'm Jim, blah, 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 blah. Turns out it's the Mitchell brothers. I don't know if you know.
Sure.
Remember San Francisco, the Mitchell brothers and all that? And I was like, oh, wow.
The O'Farrell Theater, right?
The O'Farrell Theater. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So that was wild. So I thought it had gotten as crazy as it could possibly be. They go downstairs. I'm still in the kitchen having a beer, trying to search up some food. Knock on the door again. I open the door and it's Hunter Thompson. And I was kind of like, and he goes, yes, I am. And he was standing there and he had a big old, like, I don't know if it's a half gallon or it's one of those big oversized jugs of Jack Daniels. And he kind of holds it up and he goes, I got mine. And just kind of goes through and goes downstairs. All right. It was fun. One guy to watch a game with. He had some unique perspectives on things.
Sure.
Yeah. No, it was fun. It was a good time. And that was San Francisco back then. You got to remember, they had just kind of gotten over the whole Dan White, Harvey Milk, the whole shooting and everything else that happened in City Hall.
Right.
And, the city it was devastated, but, that's such a resilient place. They adjusted, and it was fun to be around them. And, as that team got better and better and we started to keep winning Super Bowls, we kept having victory parades. But the crowds never got bigger than that first one.
Yeah.
They got pretty damn big.
Did you ever, you retired after the 88 Super Bowl and the Niners went back to back in 89. Did you ever wish you stuck around for one more year, or were you good?
Oh, yeah, I'm human. Yeah. I mean, I was working for the NFL Today on the sideline of the playoffs that year. So it's January of 90 now. And the Niners, I can't remember. I think they were playing the Vikings this is the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there, and I've been there the week before too for the divisional game. And at the divisional game, I'd watch them start that game. And the first thing I thought of right then, I watched them, I went, damn, they're going to do it. They're going to do it again. This team is too good. I mean, they're going to win the Super Bowl. And I got to work radio in the Super Bowl, just sort of by pure coincidence, happenstance, whatever. And that's kind of I ever told you that story?
No.
I'm in New Orleans. The Super Bowl between Denver and San Francisco is in New Orleans. It's Saturday morning. I'm in the hotel, and I've been out, dinner, drinks, friends, fun, till New Orleans late.
Right.
So this is like at 8 or 9 in the morning. My phone rings, and a guy on the phone goes, "Yeah, hi, this is so and so. I'm the president of CBS Radio, and I'd like, we need you to be available to do the Super Bowl tomorrow. Can you do it?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, sure." Hang up. 30 seconds later, the phone rings again, and the voice says, "This is Frank Murphy, damn it. I'm the president of CBS Radio. And if you're not going to do it, just say no, but do not hang up on me again." I was like, "Ooh, shit." Sat up in bed, and I go, "Yeah, I can do that." It turns out Hank Stram, who did it with Joe Buck, had laryngitis.
Oh, okay.
And if anybody that knew Hank Stram knew, if he could make money going to a speaking appearance, he was going to make it. Right. And he'd do as many as he could, as often as he could during the Super Bowl. Well, his voice wasn't getting any better, and they wanted me to be available. So I basically sat in the back of the booth and was there until, just after halftime. The president of CBS Sports, Pilson, comes in, Neil Pilson. He looks at me and goes, "You're on. This sounds terrible."
Oh, wow.
And, Hank didn't want to leave. And so I'm on the headset up on the second row. And finally he gets up and storms out. But I got to do that game, which was pretty cool. I think the biggest part was probably working with Buck. He was, I kept listening. I'm listening to him, kind of how cool his voice and the way he's calling the game.
Yeah.
And for the first little bit, I had a hard time realizing, hey, idiot, he's talking to you.
Right.
He's asking you questions.
Right. Yeah, you're just sitting there enjoying this would have been Jack Buck, the old man, right?
Jack Buck, yeah.
Yeah, Jack Buck, man. Yeah, and he was so great. I grew up in Minneapolis, so he the 91 World Series, when Puckett hit the Game 6 home run to win it, his call is just legendary. I go back and listen to that on YouTube and just get goosebumps watching that ball go over the fence, and Jack Buck saying it. "We'll see you tomorrow night." It's just he was so understated with his calls, but so much power to him. It was really talented guy. Yeah, let's circle back. This is a college football show. That was a great NFL excursion. Let's circle back to college football and the Pac-12 for a minute. I believe the Pac-12 college football is better with the Pac-12 really in play, but the conference has been beleaguered of late. The Pac-12 network was a disaster. The last commissioner, you mentioned this earlier, he wanted to make sure the league was good at tennis, volleyball, water polo, gymnastics, the Olympic sports. Those are great sports. No offense at all to those sports.
The Conference of Champions.
The Conference of Champions, great branding, but the problem is nobody knows what you're champion of if you're not good at football and basketball. Those drive college athletics. They have since the absolute beginning. And by the beginning, I mean in the 1870s, the Ivy League was making money off of football and paying for other sports. That's how far back it goes. So what does the Pac-12 do to get back in this thing? How does the Pac-12 re-engage in the big fight?
Yeah, it's I'm not going to lie. It's not going to be easy.
Yeah.
SC has made the first sort of foray into, the new universe. And they may take some teams kicking and screaming with them. I'm a little skeptical. And it's just like the NFL is light years better when the Niners and the Raiders and the Seahawks and the Rams, when they're good on the West Coast, the NFL is better.
Yeah.
And in college football, you've got to have engagement on the West Coast. You just got to.
Yeah.
And they're, it's no mystery how some of those teams kind of get ignored, where their games don't start till 10:30 at night.
Yeah.
And people just don't stay up past halftime and don't get a chance to even then see those teams that often. They're kind of footballed out by 10:30, 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
And it's sort of sad, but you're going to get better and you're going to be good at things you prioritize. So kind of like our conversation with UCLA, they've got to prioritize that football is that important. And that's going to mean NIL money, which ties into recruiting, which you don't ever stop recruiting anymore. I mean, you're recruiting your guys for all 4 or 5 years they're with you, and you're recruiting everybody else's guys. And Oregon's got that down. Be interesting to see how they do when they open the season against Georgia at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So that'll be fun to see.
Right.
I look at SC right now with Lincoln Riley is pretty well ahead of UCLA. Stanford and Cal are kind of Stanford and Cal. They could be as good as they kind of prioritize and want themselves to be. Oregon and Oregon State are separated. Oregon's significantly better. Washington and Washington State are separated because Washington's significantly better than the Cougars. Utah and Colorado, I thought were pretty good ads at first, and I think it's turned out for the conference, Colorado's been a good ad. But for the competitive nature and for the football side, like you say, the money side, yeah, Utah's been a fantastic ad.
Yeah.
Because of what Kyle Whittingham has built that program into. So if I was to pick a program that more Pac-12 teams should model themselves after, it might be Utah, not Washington, not Oregon. Who's got another Phil Knight? They don't have another Phil Knight.
Right.
But look what Kyle Whittingham has done at Utah. The way he's recruited, the kinds of teams he builds. That would be sort of my hint. You don't have to go uber high tech. There's the resources are there,
right,
but it's going to be a real uphill sled, even for SC and Lincoln Riley. It's not going to be easy, but at a place that prioritizes football the way it does, it's got a good chance of being a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, I've been encouraged by things I've seen from George Kliavkoff. I'm working with his people. I hope to get him on this Zoomcast that I'm doing and talk to him directly. I hope that's going to happen. I think it may. I've been reading the things he's said about going around the conference and giving it to people straight, saying, listen, we are good at all these other things. We have to be good at football. You have to gear your athletic departments to focus on football. That heartens me a little bit. I like that the championship game's been moved to Las Vegas. I think that's a much better showcase for the league. Down there in the Southern Bay Area was just a dead atmosphere. When you look at George Kliavkoff, do you think he's a good guy to try and lash this conference back into position?
Yeah, I mean, it's challenging. I mean, for that period of time that they went through the whole Pac-12 network and all that,
disastrous.
That's where they dropped off the map.
Yes.
They're talking about, and it's theoretically it can work, playing significantly more games at 9 o'clock in the morning. And if you're not going to play in a primetime slot, and sorry, they've got to think that primetime football is at 4:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Because everything is about the East Coast time.
Right.
It ain't about Pacific time.
Right.
So your big dogs play at 4:30. Everybody else, you've got to be where people can see you. People can't see how can you be a fan of certain football teams or a conference that almost has stealth TV coverage? Right. And he knows that, and he's doing a really good job of addressing that It's not going to happen in 6 months. It's not going to happen in a year. It's not going to happen in 2 or 3 years. But I think in a couple of years down the road, you'll look at it and go, wow, they did fix that. But it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, I hope so. His background in entertainment and his connections are also they bolster me a little bit in terms of what he's going to be able to do. I think he's a well-connected guy. You know, the Pac-12, when they brought in Larry Scott, it wasn't the worst hire on paper. It looked interesting, but Larry Scott just turned out to be a guy who didn't understand college athletics. And you mentioned the Pac-12 network. That was an absolute disaster. It set the league back. Well, we're going to find out how long it set the league back. Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at the TV money. Let's be honest. Who are you competing with? You're competing with the SC and the Big Ten.
Right.
Look at the TV money that the SEC just announced.
Oh, my Lord.
And what kind of a competitive advantage? Because that's just the money that's on top of the table.
Right.
That's not talking about the money that's under the table.
Right.
That now has a new title. The under the table money is now called NIL. And it's very all encompassing, and it's the freaking wild, wild west.
Right. I know they're going to have to get that under. Go ahead.
No, I said till further notice.
Till further notice. Yeah, absolutely.
It's the wild, wild west. The NCAA doesn't control it. The bowl championship people, they don't control it.
Nope.
You know, no one has a handle on, well, what's the ceiling? There should be a ceiling. There should be everyone talks about the eligibility and the new transfer portal and all that. Well, why or how should a guy get a big NIL deal to go to a major college team, not play the whole freshman year, first year? I shouldn't say freshman. His first year, he doesn't play at all. He basically just practices, and then get another NIL deal to go in the transfer portal and go down to another major school.
Yeah.
You know, it just, there's things that are going on in that portal that, yeah, it may be above board, but man, does it look underhanded. It really does.
Yeah, it looks really bad right now. I don't even want to drift off into the NCAA and the presidents, because I could go on about those people and their abdication of responsibility.
You mean the
forever.
NCAA, that's the enforcement agency for football, and runs basketball and every other sport?
Right.
But doesn't do stinkum?
That's the one I'm referring to.
When it comes to football, those guys? Yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
Oh man, is this screwed up? So yeah, it is. It's going to be the Wild West for a few years. I mean, you were talking about a cat. How about just a few rules? I mean, just a few. I don't even know. I don't even know if anyone's operating by any rules. You can't make it an inducement to come to your school is about the only rule anybody talks about. But that's an
what is NIL?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what is it exactly? Right.
If it's not an inducement.
Right. Exactly.
And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's ludicrous.
Is there a uniform budget? Is there a uniform amount of money that a Power 5 school could have on hand? And now, don't be fooled. There's some Group of 5 teams, and a good bit of them are either in the Mountain West or in the American, that are building significant war chests and have the backing and the kind of alumni that can put that money together.
Right.
But otherwise, there's no level playing field here. You know, you think A&M's the number one recruiting class because Jimbo just figured out how to recruit?
Well, I was under the impression that's what Jimbo said, Randy.
Eventually there's going to be some receipts. It'll be fun to see what the receipts say.
Indeed. You talked about SEC money. Did you see the article? It was a number that was around. You didn't have to read the exact article, but that laid out UCLA's $62.5 million loss in 2021, the 1 year post COVID. Yeah. So it's like a staggering number. You lose 62.5 million in the red for a college athletic department that already having some problems. Obviously, the Under Armour deal screwed UCLA. They got stabbed in the back by Under Armour. I hope they sue them for every penny of that $280 million contract that Under Armour somehow just walked away from. But some of the stuff I was really surprised to see that I did not know. I called UCLA's athletic department the Cabana Club administration when I was there. They were just hands off. They said UCLA recruits itself. Well, whatever happens, basically. We'll live with the results. UCLA rents Pauley Pavilion from UCLA Recreation. They get $2.5 million from campus every year. Just for a little comparison, Cal Berkeley, that school that we think of as not caring about sports at all, their central campus gives athletics $20 million a year, saying sports are part of our university. We're going to support them. How is UCLA renting its own basketball arena and only getting $2.5 million? I'm sorry, the $2.5 million is from student fees. That's not even from central campus. So the school isn't even supporting its own athletic department. So who do we have to talk to? Here's my question. Why does Gene Block hate sports so much?
Yeah, I couldn't answer that question. I have to go back to, I mean, it's a priority. You know, what is your priority? And you can always come back and say, our priority is to produce the highest quality of academic, standards in our conference, in the country. Our reputation speaks for itself, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And it's got to be a priority. That's the difference.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna tell you I know exactly how they're gonna do that, because it's like a light switch.
Right.
That sucker, you look at the wall. If we're having this conversation and to the right of all those hats, there is your light switch.
Right.
Is it on or is it off?
Right.
If it's on, you'd like light. If it's not, you don't mind sitting in the dark. Right now, they're sitting in the dark.
Yeah. Ironic that the University of California's Latin motto is "Let there be light." Let's throw that at the athletic department. Gene Block is chancellor, by the way. I threw his name out there like everybody's going to know it. He's chancellor of the university and he has no interest in sports. When I see Cal's chancellor saying we're supporting athletics because it's part of our university mission, UCLA is, Cal's a rival and the older little brother in the rivalry. But without being more degrading than that to Cal, UCLA is a far superior athletic institution to Cal. They surpassed them a long time ago. They beat them in everything. They just have a better athletic university than Cal. When I see Cal's chancellor saying this is part of our experience at the university level, here's $20 million a year or more, whatever we want to support your program, and UCLA is handing out peanuts to their superior athletic program, it actually, as an alum, it makes me angry. So if a university is calling me and asking for my money, I guess I'm going to say, are you going to give it to the athletic department? Because you have enough. And if your attitude is like this about athletics, why don't you just join the Ivy League? Why don't you just make it official and just back out of athletics? Because this thing where you're part of big time athletics, but you kind of pretend you're not, you're just this academic institution. It's not blending together well at all. It's a problem.
Yeah, it is. But it's age old.
Yeah.
I mean, age is old. It was, Tommy Prothro left UCLA to go to the Rams. Pepper Rogers left UCLA to go to Georgia Tech. Terry Donahue was the only stability spot that school has seen since 1968 or so, 69.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. That tells you more than anything else, the school that, how many other stepping stone jobs are in the Pac-12? SC is not a stepping stone job.
Right.
Stanford, not a stepping stone job. Cal maybe, some of the other ones maybe. but that you are what you're perceived to be, and UCLA is not perceived to be, sort of that end all destination kind of a job.
Yeah.
That across town, frankly, is. And they've had their problems and they've had their goofballs in the head coach position, but they've got the priority to fix that. And my guess is going to be within the next 24 months, you're going to see that fixed pretty significantly.
Yeah, they're clearly engaging in the modern battle, which is UCLA better do something. They're running out of time, or they're going to get left in the dust. All right, let's wrap up. I think we disagree on this, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. We'll wrap up with a little bit of college football playoff talk.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my perspective on it. I'm like a fallen traditionalist. I'm like a Catholic who's lost his faith. If I could get it back, if I could rerun college football from like a 91 to 97 outlay in terms of which bowls were around, how the game worked, I would do it over and over again. Pick a national champion on January 2, vote on it in the polls, split the title if you could, etc. So this has been a long process. We went from the Bowl Coalition to the Bowl Alliance to the Bowl Championship Series to the playoff. TV has been pushing for this playoff for decades and decades. They got it. Only there's a problem. It's not a playoff. It's a 4-team invitational. It doesn't include the entire country. And conferences in college football are classic frenemies. They work together when it's for each of their good. When it's not, they work against each other. So we got a situation in this playoff where some leagues with some advantages, in the South specifically, they have a demographic advantage, they have an interest in the game advantage, they have a TV contract advantage, et cetera. But we're creating a sport where what was always unequal is becoming increasingly unequal. And it's a problem. So for me to have a playoff, it has to include the whole country, and that means expansion. So just on that base point of expansion to make it a true playoff, what are your thoughts there?
I'm sort of another mind. Let's put it that way. Like you said, we kind of don't agree on this.
Yeah.
I'm of the mind of, if we have currently somewhere in that 130 to 140, FBS kind of teams, they're not competitive. Of those, let's say 130 something, 50 or 60 are really competitive. And I believe to survive, the playoff is not necessary to expand to 8 or 12. I think what you need to do is you need to sort of condense your competition group that you're getting your playoff teams out of. It's my opinion we should have relegation in college football. It's my opinion that we should have, if we have 5 teams, 5 12-team conferences, you got 60 teams. Those are the groups from which your teams will come. Now, what do you do with the other ones? Well, the other ones are still going to play. They're going to play each other. But you'll get a chance to go in and out. The lower end of those 60 teams, if you're not at a certain amount, you're not at a certain proficiency, you're going to be relegated back to everybody else. And the best teams out of that other group will get a chance to come up and see if they can function and stay. Some form of that, I think, is the future of college football. And I think when it comes to the playoff, I can't convince myself to like 12, much less 8 teams in a true playoff situation. I know what FCS does. I'm very aware of that. I just don't think the talent and the competitiveness is there to give you true 12 teams. Look at who's been the number 12 team in the country over the last 5 or 6 years, and make an argument that there's a screaming need to include them and it's having a chance to be a national champion. I just don't see it.
Right. Well, that gap has gotten bigger. Historically in college football, if you were a top 15 team, really on any given Saturday, there would have been most years an opportunity that you could beat anyone in that pool. The gap has increased over the last 10, 15 years as the money has poured into the power leagues, and then especially the teams at the top of those power leagues. Relegation is an interesting idea to me. I don't see it as being particularly practical or feasible. And one of the reasons I say that is college football is built on a very specific structure. It's a historical game. It's mostly still a geographical game. Normally conference sort of breakups bother me, but with Texas rejoining the SEC, we're going to get Texas A&M back, which is a game that college football really needs. That's a game that built this sport. So when you talk about sort of creating these new conferences, I think you risk damaging the thing that made college football so valuable, which is it's different than the NFL. So that's always the problem you're going to have, is the more you try to make college football like the NFL, I think the less compelling a game it becomes for people like me who like college football. So the relegation, the reorganization of conferences, I think you have to be careful to not lose the traditional rivalries and the traditional games that built this sport. If it gets to that point, I think we're talking about a different game, which could happen. I call this moment, we're in a revolutionary moment. To be honest, extreme changes in the next 10 or 15 years would not shock me, because it's we've untethered ourselves from the past and we're kind of free floating right now.
Yeah, there's no telling what this game is going to look like.
Yeah,
from a structure standpoint after this next contract. People, for everybody that always the last few years is like, we've got to have 8 teams, we got to have 12, we got to change the playoff now. It's like, okay, boys, who pays the freight for that? And when is their contract up? And what's their negotiation window? Do you have a negotiation window? Does it kick in 2 years before it ends? I mean, the reality is until, 24, 25, 26, nothing's going to change. You can talk about it. You can maybe renegotiate a deal, but, it's not the good news is that radical change isn't soon, but it's sometime around the end of this next deal or so. You're going to see some pretty seismic shifts. Unfortunately, you'll still have a chance to schedule some of these great rivalries. They may not be in the same conference, but you'll still have the chance to schedule these. But I hate to use that overused, it is what it is, but I mean, it's just not competitive. People want to say, it's just not. The SEC, the Big Ten, even the ACC, the Big 8, it's Big 12, whatever you want to call about them. I mean, I have a hard time saying Big 12 when there's only 8 teams. I don't know about you. Right. The whole deal. Then you got the problem we were talking about earlier with the Pac-12. I just think that's one of the problems they're going to have to face. And that's why I say that, limiting the number of teams, because you already do it in whether by fact or not including people. I mean, you look at teams that play in the MAC, teams that play even in the Mountain West, in the American, the Group of 5, the Conference USA, it's just, they don't get the chances. They don't. But that's just kind of, I believe you're struggling mightily with kind of a relegation form already. Because if you're trying to move around here in the Group of 5 and say, well, we're going to go from this one over here to this one over here, it's apples and apples.
Yeah.
I think that idea of limiting the number and then having to earn your inclusion in that number is kind of the only way to go. And there's not that many teams that can compete. And realistically,
Yeah, and college football has really always been like that. I mean, there's always, you talk about a top 60, it's really like a top 30 who have ever been really competitive when you're talking about trying to win leagues and win national titles.
Yeah. How many titles has Vandy won? How many titles has Oregon State won?
Oh yeah, you go back to the 20s with Vandy. You got Danny McGuckin down there, fielding Yost protege, and there were some bad boys back in the 20s.
Yeah, and the ACC's got their participants, and then there's Kansas, and then you just look at some of these schools that are the bottom end of these conferences. They're great institutions. They're unbelievably strong academically, and maybe they're great in basketball and some other stuff.
Right.
But football's the big dog, and I think as it goes forward, it's going to get even worse.
Well, it could be. Yeah, there definitely needs to be some restraints put on the game and some shifting around. Otherwise, it's going to be the thing that I think we're risking. And here's the kind of the other side of my playoff, not the other side, the continued argument for my playoff expansion. There's a bunch of stuff. What you're talking about, I don't know that we disagree so much actually on this. I think we're looking at two different futures for the game. The one you're looking at is different than the future I see. If the game goes the direction you're forecasting, then what I'm looking at isn't going to matter anyways. It's going to be a different game. So I guess more than anything, I'm thinking of college football holding on to what it can of what made it, while trying to continue it being a compelling game for a television audience and a non-collegiate audience, people who just want to watch good football. So when I see these arguments, they all seem fear-based to me. One is the SEC will just get stronger. And my response to that is fine. Then they'll take over the sport completely. They'll dominate it totally. The game will fracture. It'll become hyper-regional. The TV contracts will go way down because only one group of people will really be tuned in, and college football will be something else. So if that's going to happen, then fait accompli, that's what happens. The other argument is that it'll hurt the regular season. Now, the playoff format has to be set up correctly to not hurt the regular season. So I see kind of a hybrid thing. If we take the 12 teams they're talking about, all those things you're mentioning, it will be focused on the Power 5 leagues and has to be. So if there's an auto bid for those smaller schools, it has to be just the best of the smaller schools, and we'll have to bring some metric in to pick that one school from the smaller schools. And if by some crazy chance there's a second team from the group of 5 that's good enough, they'll have some very difficult road to get in, but it could conceivably happen. So assuming we get the playoff structure set up right, I say it enhances the regular season because you have auto bids for the Power 5 conference champions. The best team gets in, or maybe not the best team, the team that wins the league gets in. People counter that and they say, well, what if an 8-5 team upsets a 13-0 team in the league championship? So be it. Upsets happen all the time. That team earned their way into the playoff. And that now 13-1 team, if they were good enough, if they scheduled well enough in the non-conference, they could slip in with one of the few remaining auto bids and get into the playoff and have a chance to redeem themselves. The other argument I hear is ruin bowl season. I say bowl season has already been fouled beyond belief. When you have guys opting out of the Rose Bowl, your bowl season is in big trouble. When you have guys opting out of New Year's 6 games who almost won the Heisman Trophy, your bowl season is in big trouble. So I think you need to add these bowl games to the playoff to make them significant games to hopefully keep some of these guys.
How about bowl games with actual people in the stands?
Right.
How many bowl games have half full stadiums?
Right.
Of the ones we already see.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? I'm fine with doing what we always do in the United States with this stuff is leave it to the open market. If these people want to, if there are teams to play, if there are sponsors to pay for it, if there's a stadium to rent and they want to put on a bowl game, go ahead and do it. If you can afford it, you can do it. If you don't, you can't. So people say, well, then we'll only have those bowls that are in the playoff. And it's maybe, but there's probably going to be other bowls that are going to stage games that people are going to watch on TV. And you'll still have them. The ones that can survive will survive. But I think in college football, we need to protect our best bowl games. Those built the postseason in this sport. We can't have people opting out of a New Year's Six game. Like in numbers that we're seeing now, we can't have the best guys opting out of the Rose Bowl. By the way, I love that Ohio State's receiver, the one who wasn't in Jigba, who wasn't in a position to opt out, had a monster Rose Bowl. I love that happened.
Yeah. The opt-out thing, I'm not sure there's going to be a solution to that.
Yeah.
Outside of then you're looking at sort of the exclusions that we've already seen from an antitrust standpoint, what you can do. Because, now you're talking about employees, you're talking about professionals in the college level.
Right.
So how do you incentivize that to prevent that opt-out?
Right.
That's your only option, because they're not doing it for lack of loyalty to the program.
Right.
They're doing it looking to the next level.
Yeah.
And ignoring the fact that a good number of them won't play in the NFL. They think they will, and everybody around them tells them they will. But the reality is there's just not that much room on a year-to-year basis for that many jobs. But yeah, it's the opt-out won't go away. It really won't. You can temporarily fix it by offering more money.
Right.
A separate NIL deal to play that last game. I don't know. There's there's solutions to the problem, but none of them, are non-slimy.
Right. Yeah. That last point you made, or a couple of points ago, is that's the sad thing to me, is a lot of these guys have people in their ear who are seeing their cut of the future paycheck and telling this person, man, don't go play this game. You got big money. You got a big career coming. And you're right. A lot of them just aren't going to make it. I mean, 2% of guys get a real shot. Less than that really stick around in the NFL for long careers. So for a lot of these guys, they're being talked out of playing in a Rose Bowl, and maybe they never play a game in the NFL. And maybe they look back and they say, fine, I didn't really want to play in the Rose Bowl. I don't care. But some of these guys might look back and go, man, that would have been something I would have liked to tell my people about 30 years down the road, show them a video that I played in the Rose Bowl once. So tough choices all around. They are business decisions, and these guys got to do what they think is right. But for just a pure college football perspective, which is really where I come from, it's something the game is going to have to deal with in some way. And maybe it's just the new reality. So
yeah. Like I said, the new reality is these are all employees.
Yeah.
You can come up with whatever acronym you want.
Right.
You can use whatever term you want. You can ignore whatever piece of it you want. But the reality is they are employees.
Yeah.
And the IRS is now officially involved in college athletics, because those bags full of money never really got into the tax returns. Now,
right,
it's all there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The cutouts in the mattress for the cash are gone. Now those are heading digitally into bank accounts. So there's a record. It's a good point. All right, Randy, I've kept you for a long time today. I really enjoyed the conversation, though. And thanks for stopping by the Fifth Down HQ here and talking with us about football.
I appreciate it, Mark. I'm a big fan and love everything you guys do.
Randy, you're the man. I'll talk to you on Twitter. I'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourself. All right.
Sounds good, Mark. Thank you.
Yes, sir.